company. Everyone believed he'd inherited everything. I let them think that. The next morning, while I was arranging fresh lilies in the living room, a sharp voice floated from the kitchen and froze me in place. "She's going to drain our money," my daughter-in-law said, her tone like glass breaking. "Put her in a care home?" My son hesitated. "She's still my mother." "Exactly," she shot back. "She wanders this house like a ghost, eating our savings." We cover her food, her medicine. For what? 6 months earlier, I had buried my husband of 42 years. Richard built Hartwell Industries from nothing, and I'd been by his side through every sleepless night. Now I was being spoken of like an unwanted guest. They didn't know the truth. Richard had been far more careful than they imagined. Quietly, years ago, he arranged it so that I owned 75% of Hartwell Industries. The empire they believed was theirs was still mine. I'd signed the formalities Blaine brought me after the funeral, pretending to be the grieving widow too lost to understand legal terms. It was easier than confronting who my son had become. From the hallway, I heard Blaine finally murmur, "Maybe you're right. Maybe she'd be happier around people her own age." Something inside me cracked. Later, Lilia approached me with a sweet practice smile. "Sloan, you must be lonely in this big house. You found some lovely communities, activities, friends your age. You'd enjoy it." I looked straight into her calculating eyes and simply asked, "When?" They still had no idea whose signature truly controlled their future. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my calm. "Well, we thought maybe next week." "I've already scheduled a tour for Thursday. Next week, they booked it already." "I see," I said, returning to my toast. "You're not upset, are you?" Lilia's voice carried a hint of suspicion. "This is really what's best for everyone." I met her gaze with the same polite smile I'd worn for months. "Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best." But inside, a quiet resolve was forming. Richard's words echoed in my mind. "Don't let anyone push you around, Sloan." The time for silence was over. Sunset Manor was nothing like the lovely community Lilia had promised. The beige walls showed water stains. The carpet smelled of disinfectant and something less pleasant I couldn't name. My assigned room was barely bigger than a hotel bathroom. "This is temporary," Blaine mumbled as he carried in my 2 allowed suitcases, "just until we find the right long-term solution." He couldn't meet my eyes. That was 3 weeks ago. I hadn't heard from him since. In the common room, Mrs. Chen played solitaire with a deck missing the Queen of Hearts. Through the window, the maple tree blazed the same brilliant red I'd admired in my own backyard every October for 40 years. "You're the new one, aren't you?" The voice belonged to Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, who moved with surprising speed behind a walker. "Your family put you here too?" "Something like that," I replied. She snorted. "They always have their reasons. Mine said I was a safety risk after I fell once. 30 years I raised those kids, and one tumble means I'm useless." The room filled with the usual afternoon crowd, most wearing that same resigned expression, faces of people who'd stopped expecting anything good. I understood that feeling all too well. "What did you do before this?" Eleanor asked. "I helped run a company with my husband," I said. It wasn't technically true, but it felt true. "What kind of company?" "Manufacturing, industrial parts." Her eyebrows rose. "Sounds important." "It was," I said, watching residents argue over the TV remote. "My son runs it now." "And how's that working out?" I thought of the quiet reports I'd been receiving from Marcus, Richard's old attorney. Blaine had made 3 reckless moves in a single month, canceling contracts with longtime suppliers for cheaper deals, laying off experienced workers to cut costs, and greenlighting a new product line with no market research. "Not well," I admitted. "They never listen, do they?" Eleanor shook her head. "Because we're older, they think we know nothing." My daughter took over my finances and lost 20% in 6 months. That evening, I called Marcus from the hallway payphone. The line crackled, but his voice came through. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm glad you called. We need to talk about the Riverside account." Riverside was our largest client, nearly a third of annual revenue. "What about it?" "Your son ended the contract yesterday. He thinks he's found a better opportunity." My grip tightened. Richard had cultivated that relationship for 15 years. What opportunity? A startup with no track record. They promise 15% higher margins, but the funding already looks unstable. This could be a serious problem. I closed my eyes, feeling Richard's presence like a whisper. He always warned, the most dangerous time for a business is when inexperienced hands take over in an emotional storm. Marcus, I need you to do something. Quietly, I said. Of course. Document every decision Blaine makes, contracts, staffing, finances, without his knowledge. Consider it done. And there's something else. Your daughter-in-law has been asking about your personal assets. She suspects hidden accounts or property. I almost laughed. Lilia's greed was showing. What kind of questions? She asked if you have stocks, bonds, or real estate outside the estate. I told her I couldn't share client details, but she was persistent. Don't tell her anything, I said. And Marcus, start preparing paperwork. I may need to make changes soon. When I returned to my room, my roommate, Mrs. Patterson, sat on her bed, clutching a letter with trembling hands. Bad news? I asked gently. My grandson, she whispered, promised to visit last weekend. And the weekend before that. She didn't need to finish. I knew the ache behind those words. I'd seen the pattern before. Promises that slowly turned into excuses. Visits that stretched farther apart. Calls that stopped altogether. I raised him after his parents died, Mrs. Patterson whispered. Gave up everything so he'd have a good life. And now he can't spare an hour for me. I sat on my narrow bed, studying the woman across from me. She'd given everything to family, just like I had. Just like Eleanor had. Just like most of the women in this place. Mrs. Patterson, I asked quietly, did you ever imagine what you'd do if you could change things? If you weren't as powerless as they think? She looked up startled. What do you mean? Just a thought. If you could take control of your life again, would you? For a heartbeat, her eyes brightened, the first spark I'd seen there. That night, I lay awake, listening to Mrs. Patterson's gentle snore and Eleanor's muffled complaints down the hall. Through the thin walls came the sound of someone crying softly. This place was full of women who'd been discarded, labeled burdens, convinced they had no power. But I wasn't powerless. I simply hadn't chosen to use my power yet. I thought of Blaine in Richard's office, making reckless decisions that threatened everything his father built. I thought of Lilia, probably redecorating my house with money she believed was hers, selling my belongings as if they were yard sale leftovers. Tomorrow I would call Marcus again. It was time to remind my family that real power doesn't always look the way they expect. Outside my window, a storm gathered, lightning flashing in the distance, wind rattling the old building's panes. The storm wasn't just outside, it was rising inside me too. Blaine and Lilia had no idea what was coming. There has to be more money somewhere. Lilia's voice carried down the hallway as she and Blaine approached. I quickly slid the financial documents Marcus had brought me under my pillow and left the door cracked just enough to watch them. Lilia clutched a manila folder, her heels clicking with purpose. Mom, Blaine said softly, knocking. Can we come in? I arranged myself on the bed, making sure to look frail and uncertain. Of course, dear. They stepped into the cramped room. Lilia's nose wrinkled at the institutional smell. Her new coat, cashmere expensive, caught my eye. Probably bought with what she thought was my money. How are you feeling? Blaine asked, his eyes scanning the room rather than meeting mine. Oh, some days are better than others, I said, letting a slight tremor creep into my voice. The food here isn't very good. Lilia shot Blaine a look that clearly said, get on with it. Mom, we need to talk about some financial matters, White Coat Blackie, Blaine began, settling into the single chair. When Dad passed, there were inconsistencies in the paperwork. I blinked slowly, feigning confusion. What kind of inconsistencies? Lilia leaned forward, unable to hide her impatience. Sloan, we found references to accounts and assets that aren't in the estate documents. We need to know what Richard might have kept hidden. Hidden from them, not from me. I don't understand, I said. Your father handled all of that. I never paid much attention to those things. It wasn't a lie. Richard had managed the daily details, but I'd been part of every major decision. Mom, this is important, Blaine pressed. The business has some cash flow problems. If there are additional assets, cash flow problems. Marcus had already warned me Blaine's choices were catching up with him. What kind of problems? I asked, keeping my tone innocent. Nothing serious, Lilia said too quickly. Just normal business fluctuations. But we need a complete picture of all available resources. Resources, they meant my resources. I really don't know anything about hidden accounts, I answered truthfully. There weren't any hidden accounts, just accounts they didn't know were mine. Your father always said I didn't need to worry about money matters. Think, Mom, Blaine urged, desperation edging his voice. Did he ever mention offshore accounts, investment properties, stocks, other companies? I studied my son's face. The stress was written there. Dark circles, a nervous twitch I remembered from childhood when he'd done something wrong. The weight of running a company he didn't understand was crushing him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry. Then I remembered the conversation I'd overheard, the way they'd spoken about me as if I were nothing. Sympathy vanished. There might be some old papers in the house, I said slowly, in your father's study. But I'm not sure what they mean. Lilia's eyes lit up. What kind of papers? Investment statements, I think, some legal documents. They're in the filing cabinet behind his desk. It was true, but those papers wouldn't give them what they wanted. I watched Blaine study me, waiting for a hint of weakness. Anything else you can remember? He asked. I let my shoulders sag. I'm sorry. Sometimes my memory isn't what it used to be. It was only a half-truth. My memory for unimportant details might wander, but I knew exactly where Richard had hidden the things that mattered. He'd been careful, meticulous, tucking certain documents where only someone who understood his mind could ever find them. When they finally left, I waited 20 minutes before picking up the hallway phone. They're getting desperate, I told Marcus. How bad is it? Worse than we thought, he said. The Riverside cancellation triggered a chain reaction. 2 more major clients are reconsidering. Your son is scrambling to cover operating expenses. I closed my eyes. Richard had spent 3 decades building that company. Watching Blaine dismantle it in a few months felt like watching a cathedral crumble brick by brick. There's something else, Marcus added. Your daughter-in-law hired a private investigator to dig into your finances. Hidden assets, undisclosed investments. She's convinced you're hiding money. The irony almost made me laugh. They were hunting for funds that were never theirs in the first place. Accelerate the timeline, I said. How fast can you have the papers ready? Friday, he answered. Are you sure you want to move forward? I thought of my cramped room, of Mrs. Patterson crying over her grandson's broken promises, of Eleanor's daughter draining her savings, of the way Lilia had looked at me like I was clutter in her perfect life. I'm sure, I said. That afternoon, Eleanor appeared with the newspaper. Thought you'd want to see this. She spread the business section across the table. The headline stole my breath. Local manufacturing company faces major layoffs. I read aloud. Hartwell Industries has lost several major contracts in recent months, forcing management to consider significant workforce reductions. The company, family-owned for over 30 years, is struggling under new leadership. New leadership, they meant Blaine. That your son's company? Eleanor asked. I nodded, speechless. Sounds like he's in over his head. I pictured the employees who had stood beside Richard for decades, families depending on those paychecks. Blaine wasn't only destroying his father's legacy, he was destroying lives. What would you do? I asked Eleanor quietly. If you could stop something terrible from happening, but it would hurt someone you love? She studied me. Depends how much hurt. Sometimes people we love need consequences. Sometimes that's the only way they learn. That evening, Mrs. Patterson showed me a photo her grandson had finally sent. A brand new BMW. He says he's too busy with work to visit, she said, pride flickering in her tired eyes. I stared at the glossy car, thinking of Lilia's cashmere coat, of how easily money seduces people, how quickly it makes them forget what matters. My grandson bought a car instead of visiting the grandmother who raised him. My son inherited a thriving business and was running it into the ground. My daughter-in-law hunted for more money while I ate bland cafeteria meals. The time for protecting anyone from consequences was over. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The phone rang at 6 a.m. I was already awake, watching the sunrise through my small window. Mrs. Hartwell, Marcus said, his voice tight. We have a situation. How bad? Your son just filed for emergency bankruptcy protection. The company is hemorrhaging cash faster than anyone expected. He's desperate. I closed my eyes, a mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction washing over me. Richard always warned, pride comes before the fall. Blaine's pride had been enormous. What triggered it? I asked. The Johnson contract. 15 years with Hartwell. Your son demanded a 20% price hike. They walked and signed with a competitor. Johnson accounted for 12% of annual revenue. Between that, Riverside, and the other losses, half the company's income is gone in 2 months. Marcus hesitated. There's more. Your daughter-in-law has started liquidating personal assets. The house goes on the market today. My house. The place where Richard and I celebrated 42 anniversaries. Where I'd trusted Blaine to let me stay for the rest of my life. She can't sell my house, I said, even as I knew the truth. Legally, it wasn't mine anymore. I'd signed it over to Blaine after the funeral, believing his promise. Trust. Such a fragile thing. I stayed in the hallway after Marcus's call, the receiver heavy in my hand, letting the reality settle. Blaine and Lilia were about to sell the house where Richard and I had built a lifetime, the place that held every photo album, every book, every piece of china passed down from my grandmother. When I finally called Blaine's office, I knew he'd already be there, drowning in spreadsheets and panic. Mom. His voice sounded worn thin. How did you get this number? I called the main line and asked for you. I heard about the company, I said. Are you all right? A pause. Who told you? It's in the newspaper. Word gets around. I'm handling it, he said, but the slight crack in his voice betrayed him. Bankruptcy protection isn't temporary, Blaine. That's admitting defeat. You don't understand business, Mom. This is just a strategic reorganization. The condescension in his tone lit something dangerous inside me. I understand that your father built that company from nothing, I said, low and steady. And you've managed to tear it apart in 2 months. That's not fair. What's not fair is watching you throw away 30 years of work because you're too proud to admit you don't know what you're doing. Silence. Are you selling my house? I asked at last. Another long pause. Mom, we need the capital. The house is just sitting there. And with your medical expenses in the nursing home. My medical expenses? My voice sharpened. I take 2 prescriptions that cost less than $50 a month. Well, the nursing home? The nursing home you chose, I cut in. The one you put me in so I wouldn't be inconvenient anymore. That's not why. Then why, Blaine? Why exactly did you put your mother here? The silence told me everything his words would not. Because Lilia wanted me gone. Because I reminded them of the promises they'd broken. The house has to be sold, he said finally. I'm sorry. I hung up without a goodbye. That afternoon, I sat in the common room with Eleanor and Mrs. Patterson, a game show flickering on the old television while my mind calculated and planned. You're thinking hard, Eleanor said, watching me closely. Care to share? I looked at these 2 women, sharp, capable, and discarded the moment they became inconvenient. What if I told you there's a way to take back some control? I asked quietly. Not just for me, but for all of us. Mrs. Patterson muted the TV. What do you mean? I mean, what if the people who put us here had to face real consequences? What if they learned we're not as powerless as they think? Eleanor's eyes narrowed with interest. Go on. Some of us have resources our families know nothing about, I continued. Power they've forgotten we hold. Are you talking about fighting back? Mrs. Patterson asked. I'm talking about justice, I said. About reminding them that respect isn't optional, and that treating people like we don't matter carries a price. Eleanor leaned forward. What kind of price? I smiled then, a true smile. The first in months, the kind that signals a turning point. Outside, storm clouds gathered, wind pressing against the windows. This time I wasn't waiting for the storm to pass. I intended to be the storm. By Thursday morning at 10, the emergency shareholders meeting would begin. Marcus had arranged it under the pretense of addressing Hartwell Industries' financial crisis. What Blaine didn't know was that I, the majority shareholder, had called the meeting myself. I chose my outfit carefully, my best navy dress, the one I used to wear to board meetings when Richard was alive. Eleanor helped pin my hair into the severe bun I always wore when I meant business. You look like you're going to war, she said. I am, I replied. The taxi ride to Hartwell Industries felt like stepping back in time. I hadn't been there since Richard's funeral, when Blaine insisted I didn't need to worry about complicated business matters. The conference room hadn't changed, a long mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the industrial district Richard had built. Blaine sat at the head of the table, his father's chair, papers scattered in front of him. He looked up, confusion giving way to embarrassment, then annoyance. Mom, what are you doing here? Lilia sat beside him, immaculate as ever, nails tapping the table. This is a business meeting, Sloan, she said coolly. Not a social visit. I walked to the far end of the table, my usual seat from years past. Marcus followed, leather briefcase in hand, and I saw Lilia's eyes narrow. Blaine, I said evenly, I called this meeting. He blinked. You called it? Mom, you're not... He stopped, realizing how that sounded. I'm not what? Not part of this company? I folded my hands. Marcus, please explain my role at Hartwell Industries. Marcus opened the briefcase and laid a thick stack of documents on the table. Mrs. Sloan Hartwell owns 75% of Hartwell Industries, he said. She has been the majority shareholder since the company's incorporation in 1987. Silence. Blaine's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Lilia went pale. That's impossible, Blaine finally managed. Dad left the company to me. I saw the will. The will granted you 25% ownership and operational control, Marcus replied smoothly. But your father structured the ownership to protect your mother's interests. She has always held the controlling stake. I watched the realization settle over my son, the contracts he'd canceled, the employees he'd fired, the reckless decisions, every one of them made with my property. You knew, Lilia whispered. All this time you knew. I knew, I said simply. Just as I knew when you put me in a nursing home. When you sold my belongings. When you listed my house for sale. Blaine found his voice. Mom, if you owned the company, why didn't you say something? Why let me destroy it? Because I needed to see what kind of man you'd become without your father's guidance. To see if you'd earned the right to run his company. The weight of that truth filled the room. And your assessment? Lilia asked, lawyer instincts resurfacing despite her shock. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man Richard and I once believed in. My assessment is that you failed completely. In 2 months, you've lost 40% of this company's revenue, laid off 37 employees, many loyal to your father for over a decade, and chased quick profits instead of long-term stability. I rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the factory floor. But the business failures aren't what disappoint me most. Then what? Blaine's voice was small. What disappoints me is that you put your mother in a substandard nursing home and sold her house to cover your mistakes. That you saw me as a burden instead of a resource. That you forgot every value your father tried to teach you about family, loyalty, and respect. Lilia straightened, regaining her poise. What do you want, Sloan? Money? An apology? What is this really about? This is about consequences, I said. Blaine, you're fired. Effective immediately. He shot to his feet. You can't fire me. This is my inheritance. No, I said calmly. This is my company. Your inheritance was the chance to prove yourself worthy of running it. You've proven the opposite. Marcus slid a document across the table. Mrs. Hartwell, this removes Blaine Hartwell from all operational roles within the company, effective immediately. Your signature is required. I signed without hesitation. What about the bankruptcy filing? Lilia demanded. It will be withdrawn, I replied. I'm injecting capital to stabilize operations. The company will survive, under new management. Blaine's face went ashen. Mom, please, he said, his voice breaking. I chose my words carefully, steady and final. You had your chance, Blaine. You chose to see me as a burden instead of asking for my help. You chose to hide me away instead of honoring me. Those weren't business decisions. They were character decisions. And character can't be taught to a 40-year-old man. I gathered my purse and stood. Marcus will handle the transition. You can see yourselves out. At the door, Lilia's voice cut through the silence. This is cruel, Sloan. He's your son. I turned back once. Yes, he is. And if I don't hold him accountable, who will? Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. I left them there in the conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of their assumptions about power, control, and who truly owned what. A taxi waited to take me back to Sunset Manor, but only for a short time. I had phone calls to make. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, morning light streaming through windows that actually opened. The house was smaller than the one Lilia had sold. a comfortable ranch with a garden where I could grow the tomatoes Richard and I once tended together. The coffee was brewing when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Eleanor holding a covered dish. "Thought you might like some of my famous coffee cake," she said as I opened the door. "Mrs. Patterson helped with the recipe." Eleanor had been the first to move out of Sunset Manor after I purchased a small apartment building downtown and converted it into affordable senior housing. Real housing with dignity, respect, and activities that mattered. "How's Mrs. Patterson settling in?" I asked, leading Eleanor into the bright kitchen. "Oh, she loves her new place." And guess what? Her grandson finally visited. Seems having his grandmother in a real home made it easier for him to show up. I poured coffee into the china cups I'd rescued from storage before Lilia could sell them. "Any word from Blaine?" Eleanor asked gently. I'd been expecting the question. In 6 months, my son had called only 3 times. First with angry threats of legal action, his lawyer advised against it, then with bargaining promises to change, and finally, just last week, with something different. "He got a job," I said. "Entry level at a small manufacturing company. He's starting over. How do you feel about that?" I stirred cream into my coffee and thought it through. Hopeful. For the first time since his father died, Blaine is learning what work really means, what it's like to earn something instead of inherit it. The truth was more complicated. I missed my son and the closeness we once had before grief and greed reshaped him into a stranger. But I didn't regret my choice. "What about Lilia?" Eleanor asked. "Divorced." Finalized last month, I sipped my coffee, savoring the taste. Apparently Blaine wasn't as appealing without the trust fund and the executive title. Eleanor shook her head. "Some people only love what you can give them." After she left, I drove to the Hartwell Industries building for my weekly check-in. Sarah Chen, the new CEO, who had worked her way up from the factory floor, had stabilized operations and won back 2 of the contracts Blaine lost. "The Johnson manufacturing team wants to meet with you personally," Sarah said as we reviewed quarterly reports. "They're interested in expanding their partnership." "Set it up," I told her, "but make sure they know this is your company to run. I'm just the owner." It was a lesson I'd learned watching Blaine. Ownership and management are entirely different skills. Sarah understood the business from the ground up and respected the people who actually made the products. Later that afternoon, I visited the senior center I'd established in the old Hartwell building downtown. It buzzed with life, painting in one room, a book club in another. "Sloan!" Mrs. Patterson waved from her easel, where she worked on a vivid landscape. "Come see what I've been painting." The canvas showed a garden in full bloom, bright and alive. "It's my dream garden," she explained. "The one I never had time to plant when I was taking care of everyone else." "Are you going to plant it for real?" I asked. Her eyes lit up. "Actually, yes. There's a community garden behind my new apartment building, and I've already signed up for a plot. This is what I'd wanted all along. Not just housing for older adults, but a place where people could create new dreams instead of waiting for the old ones to fade." Driving home that evening, I passed my old house. The new owners had painted it a fresh color and changed the landscaping. A swing set in the backyard told me children now lived there. Children who would grow up in the same rooms where I'd raised Blaine. A flicker of sadness passed through me, but it didn't last. That house belonged to the past. My future was here, in this smaller, brighter home where every choice was mine. As I pulled into the driveway, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mom, it's Blaine." I stayed in the car, engine running. "I wanted to call because I owe you an apology." A real one, not the kind I gave when I just wanted something back. His voice was different, tired but not defeated. Humbled, not broken. "I've been thinking about Dad," he continued. "About what he tried to teach me, the lessons I ignored. How he always said respect isn't automatic, it's earned. I didn't respect you, Mom. I treated you like you didn't matter. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was just scared and angry, taking it out on the person who couldn't fight back. Blaine, please, let me finish. I lost everything. The company, my marriage, the house, my savings, and I know I deserve it, not for the business mistakes, but for how I treated you. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I needed you to know that I finally understand why you did what you did." I closed my eyes, hearing Richard's voice in my son's words. "Blaine, I said softly. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't respect your choices. I never stopped being your mother. Could we maybe have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy. I'd like to try to earn back the right to be your son again. I looked at my little house, warm and welcoming, and thought about the life I'd built from the ashes of what I'd lost. I'd like that, I said, but you'll need to earn it. This isn't just about forgiveness. It's about rebuilding trust, and trust takes time. I understand, he said quietly. I have time. And Mom, I'm proud of what you've built. The senior center, the housing project, the way you saved the company. Dad would be proud too. After we hung up, I sat for a while, watching the sunset cast golden light across my garden. Tomorrow I would tend to my plants, check on my tenants, and meet with my managers. I would keep living a life built on my own choices and values. I thought about the woman I was 6 months ago. Confused, discarded, supposedly powerless. That woman is gone. Now I know that real power isn't about controlling others. It's about steering your own destiny. Some storms tear everything apart, but if you stand through them, they clear away what holds you back and leave space to build something better. I stepped out of the car and walked toward my front door, toward the future I'd chosen. The storm clouds had finally cleared. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned. On the final screen, I've left 2 more stories from this channel that just might surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.